Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. The letter. Toad was sitting on his porch when Frog came by. Frog said, "You look very sad, Toad. What's the matter?" Toad said, "This is my sad time of day. It is the time when I sit and wait for the mail to arrive. It always makes me very unhappy." "Why?" said Frog. "Because I never get any mail," said Toad. "Never?" said Frog. "No, never," said Toad. "No one has ever sent me a letter, and my mailbox is always empty." Frog and Toad sat down on the porch, feeling sad together. And then Frog said, "I have to go, Toad. There's something I must do." He went home and he took a pencil and a piece of paper and he wrote a letter. He folded it up and put it in an envelope. On the front of the envelope he wrote, "A letter to Toad." And then he found his friend Snail. "Snail," he said, "will you deliver this letter to Toad's house and put it in his mailbox?" "Sure," said Snail. Then Frog hurried back to Toad's house. Toad was taking a nap. Frog looked out the window. The snail wasn't there yet. "Frog," he said, "I think you should get up and wait for the mail some more." "No," said Toad, "I'm tired of waiting for the mail." Frog looked out the window. The snail wasn't there yet. "Toad," he said, "you never know when somebody might send you a letter." "No," said Toad, "nobody has ever sent me a letter." Frog looked out the window. The snail wasn't there yet. "Toad," he said, "you never know, somebody might send you a letter today." "No," said Toad, "nobody has ever sent me a letter, and nobody is going to send me a letter today." Frog looked out the window. The snail wasn't there yet. "Frog," said Toad, "why do you keep looking out the window?" "Because now I'm waiting for the mail," said Frog, "because I have sent you a letter." "You did?" said Toad. "What did you put in the letter?" "I said, 'Dear Toad, I'm glad you're my best friend. Love from Frog.'" "That is a very fine letter," said Toad. So Frog and Toad sat at the front on the porch and waited for the mail together. They waited a long time. 4 days later, the snail arrived, and he gave the letter to Toad, and Toad was very happy to have it. The end. It's cute, isn't it? And all over this country today, mothers are receiving letters, somewhat like Toad. The letters might be predictable. The mothers might be fairly sure they're going to get one, but that doesn't stop the mothers from being very glad when they arrive. These letters may be scruffy and small, and that doesn't bother the mothers. These letters may have jammy fingerprints or Nutella smears on them, but that doesn't bother the mothers at all. Some of these letters give evidence of ulterior motives, but that doesn't bother the mothers at all. Some of these letters show an inferior ability to spell, but guacamole is a hard word to spell, and it doesn't bother the mothers one bit. Some of the children couldn't even find a piece of paper to write the letters on, and it doesn't bother the mothers at all. Sometimes the content of these letters is not always what a mother might wish, but it doesn't bother the mothers at all. Some of the illustrations in these letters are less than flattering to the mothers to whom the letters are sent, but it doesn't bother the mothers a bit. Some of the poetry contained in these letters was written at school, And the mothers may possibly wish that their children had not written some of the things that the teachers and the other students get to read before the mother gets to read them. But ultimately, it doesn't bother the mothers at all. Even if, like little Brooke, the children evidence some character flaws in those letters. Brooke has a bit of a problem with violence. But it actually still doesn't bother the mothers at all. When these letters arrive, the mothers exclaim over the excellence of the penmanship and the artistic ability of the illustrator. And they pin those letters on their fridge with a magnet that you get free from the town council about garbage disposal. And many weeks later, when Mother's Day is long over and the mothers finally take those letters down, do they put them in the bin? No. They put them in a shoebox under their bed or in a shopping bag at the back of their cupboard. And many, many years later, when the executor is going through the estate of that mother, they find that shoebox or that shopping bag and they say, "Why did she keep this?" And the answer, of course, is that the letters don't have any monetary value. Their value, like Toad's letter, is all about emotion and sentiment. Emotions. It's a very big part of our day on Mother's Day. I popped into a chat room where people were having a debate about the validity of Mother's Day and whether we should have them at all. I'm going to put this down because for some reason it's decided not to work. Excuse me. And it was in India, actually, this chat room, and I found that the language of the people who were pro-Mother's Day was almost always exclusively about emotion. They talked about helping your mother feel appreciated and validated, helping her feel special and remembered, as if that was the most important thing. That's what Mother's Day was all about emotions. And certainly Mother's Day seems to be about emotions. It's a big part of Mother's Day. More than that, it's a big part of being a human being. Science has started looking into the science of emotions. Probably some of the earliest research was done by our old friend Charles Darwin. Back in 1872, he wrote an essay entitled "Expressing Emotions in Man and Animals." But he wasn't the only one to do study, and in the 1960s, a guy called Paul Ekman and a whole group of others did what they call the universality studies into human emotions. What they were looking for was, is emotionality a universal experience for people? And they were very careful to also investigate what they then called primitive tribes people, people who didn't live in a Western world, didn't have a Western culture, people who were not influenced by Western media. And they came with the conclusion that emotions are a universal experience. In the 1970s, by then, it had developed into a social science called kinesics. If you go and study kinesics, some of the topics you study will be affect displays, micro-expressions, and paralanguage. We study human emotions. Kinesics has identified 6 universal human emotions. Even though there are subtleties in different cultures and different things that motivate them, they reckon we have these 6. Do you think you can identify them? Top to bottom, left to right, what do you think? Sadness? Surprise or wonder? Happiness? That one's the trickiest one, I think. I think it would look better if only one nostril was hooked up. It's a sneer, it's contempt or disgust. The middle one at the bottom, yep, and the last one, fear or horror. Good, you're very good. And the idea that science is telling us is that all people all over the world experience emotions. It's a part of being a human person. It's part of our humanity. And there's a lovely fit, isn't there, with those extraordinary words in the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for everything. There's a season for every purpose under heaven. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. All people experience emotions. It's a normal part of being a human being. And no emotion is intrinsically wrong. They're just emotions. Particularly on Mother's Day, it's an interesting thing to look at. If you're a mother, you know this, that if your child, or when your child is about 2 or 3, and then again when they're about 13 or 14, their emotions are on speed dial. They can go from 0 to 100 faster than a Bugatti Veyron. They just flare. You know that, it's true. And at the same time, you're juggling your children's emotions, however many you have, and your husband, even though he doesn't think he has any, he does, and you're juggling those emotions. And it can tend to be that your own take a bit of a back seat because everything else is so exciting and dramatic. So I thought that today it might be a useful thing to have a look at emotions from a biblical perspective and to offer to mothers and sisters and aunties and teachers and grandparents and all of us who parent children in all these ways, all of us who are part of the village that it takes to raise kids, could have a think about a biblical perspective on emotions. Now, the Bible is not a kinesics handbook. It's the story of God in people, but along the way, in all those stories, there are great truths to be learned, and some of them are truths about emotions. I picked out 3 things that I thought it might be useful for us to remember. And the first is this: there is no emotion that is the goal of human experience. There is no emotion that is so valid and so important that it's the reason you're here, that it constitutes the meaning of life. That thought flies in the face of a lot of what our culture tells us. If you go to Wikipedia and ask him what is the meaning of life, this is what he says: the meaning of life is in the philosophical and religious conceptions of existence, social ties, consciousness, and happiness. Isn't that interesting? Happiness is part of the meaning of life, according to Wikipedia. The ancient Greek philosophers had a word, eudaimonia. Don't know how you say it. Sounds like pneumonia. But anyway, it translates, its nearest translation in English is happiness. The ancient Greeks. An Indian ashram called Sawan held a great consortium on the purpose of human life, and they made this statement: man is in search of happiness, but has no peace of mind. Nicholas Sparks, who writes movies that make women's hearts flutter like Nights in Rodanthe, said all people basically want one thing: they want to be happy. The editor and president, editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post, the source of a lot of the chum that comes out and fuels our social media, is a lady called Ariana, and she urges women to find personal meaning in life by prioritising the pursuit of happiness. Bradley Trevor Grieve produced this book on Mother's Day several years ago, and it went crazy. Everybody loved it. Lots of photos of animals doing wonderful motherly things and being burdened by the great tasks of motherhood. And at the end of it, very charming, very lovable, he has this great line that he says, "And what do mothers want back from you for all that they do? She just wants you to be happy." That's what he said. And in every fairy tale you read as a child, in every movie that you watch, in every song that we sing, in every story that we tell, the resolution of the story, you know the story's over if they live happily ever after. If the protagonist, we don't care about the bad guy, he can be sad, but if the good guys are all happy, it's over. They got there. That's the end goal. That's what we were after. Will Smith made a movie, The Pursuit of Happiness. It's one of those kind of stories. But the title of the story comes, in fact, from the Declaration of Independence, primarily drafted by Thomas Jefferson and adopted on the 4th of July, 1776. The basic mission statement of one of the most influential countries in the world that says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we live in a culture that is telling you loudly and often, from your infancy right through to old age, it's telling you that the reason you are here is to pursue and attain an emotion, happiness. What does the Bible say about all that? Does the Bible say that you're here to pursue and attain personal happiness? We're going to have a look at a passage from Matthew the tax collector who got accepted by Jesus. You know, if anyone knew what it was like to suddenly be accepted, Matthew would be your guy. And we're looking at the Message translation. And in chapter 5, there's a passage that covers the extraordinary Sermon on the Mount, and then a passage about salt and light. And they hang together. There's a list of these upside down blessings, what it is to be blessed by God. And then he talks about why you are here. So it's appropriate to what we're looking at. And this is what that passage of the Bible looks like. When Jesus saw his ministry drawing huge crowds, he climbed a hillside. And this is what he said. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there's more of God and his rule. You are blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat. You're blessed when you care. At that moment of being careful, you will find yourselves cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world put right, your mind and heart put right, because then you can see God in your outside world. And you're blessed when you can show other people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. You're blessed when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you even deeper into God's kingdom. Not only that, count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me. And know that you're in good company. My prophets and witnesses have always gotten into this kind of trouble. And that's the end of the upside down blessing section. And what he's saying there is when you're at the end of your rope, when you're lost and you're hungry and you care so much that it hurts and you're turned inside out and you fight for peace and you are persecuted and put down and thrown out and lied to, then you are blessed. It's upside down, isn't it? And then comes this passage about salt and light, and he says, let me tell you why you are here. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavours of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness, and you'll end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colours in this world. If I make you light bearers, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, their generous Father in heaven. You are here to be salt in a world that's lost its taste. You are here to be light in a world that's groping in the dark. The biblical picture of why you are here is different to the one the world around you is telling you. You are not here to be happy. You're not here to be in love. You're not here to be the perfect mother. You're not here to have the perfect family. You're not here to be beautiful or successful or wealthy or clever or fast or tall or fit. You're not here to get a master's degree or have a wonderful job or be rich or do better than that irritating blonde in high school. You're not here for any of that stuff. You're not here to look good or to feel good. You're here to be good. You're here to be God's goodness in a dark world. That's why you are here. and you are here to be holy, says the God who himself is holy. And the irony of that is that if you search for joy, if you search for happiness, it will elude you. But if you search for God wholeheartedly, you will be found by him, and happiness will be thrown in as a byproduct, said C.S. Lewis. But happiness is not the goal, and if you're 15, thrill-seeking is not the goal. There is no emotion that is the goal of your existence. Rather, emotions are like seasoning that season the journey. And just the same as there are seasonings that are spicy and tangy and sweet and lush and all different flavours, there are emotions that are all different. Some of them are thrilling, some of them are sad, some of them are filled with mourning, some of them are filled with light and joy. And they season this journey that we're on as we pursue Christ-likeness, which is our goal. That's the first thing I wanted to say to you. The second thing I want to say is beware volcanoes. Beware decisions made in a volcano of emotions. Sometimes emotions just rush into you and impel you into a heightened level of awareness of the world around you. It's really hard. And what I'm suggesting to you is to be cautious about those kind of emotional volcanoes and learn perhaps to wait. In a volcano of anger, Cain killed his brother Abel. In a volcano of haste, Esau sold away his birthright. In a volcano of anxiety, one of the judges called Jephthah promised God that he would offer as a sacrifice whoever was the first person to greet him when he came home after a battle, a thing God never asked him to do. In a volcano of frustration, Samson told Delilah about his hair, although he had to know by then exactly what she was going to do with that information. In a volcano of humiliation, Jonah said, I would rather be dead than see you save the people of Nineveh. What an ungod thing for a prophet to say. In a volcano of fear, John the beloved, John the disciple who leaned on Jesus' breast, John, one of 3 closest friends of Christ, John who said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, that John swore and said, I don't know him, I don't know who he is. In that moment of fear, that's what he said. And in a volcano of rebellion and anger, a crowd of Israelites, of God's chosen people, said, crucify him. And sometimes emotions jerk you around as though you're a puppet on a string. They seem very powerful. They can be very impelling. And what I'm suggesting to you is that you wait. I'm not suggesting that you cork it up, that you put a big stopper in that volcano and tap dance on the top and say, we're all victorious Christians here. We don't have bad, unchristian emotions. That's not wise. You cork up a volcano, it'll pop out somewhere else worse than before. That's not wise. But what I'm saying is you consider Gamaliel's advice. Wait, lest you find you're fighting against God. Wait. I can remember, I have 2 children. John is the elder and he came with ginger. And I can remember a thing that I learned to say to John at some times, and it was, I am so angry, I'm going to go outside of this room and be angry, and then I'll decide what I will do. But I couldn't do what I felt like doing in my anger. Do you see the difference? All emotion has its place. And if you're angry, be angry. And if you grieve, you grieve. But beware making decisions in that moment. Do you see the distinction I'm making? Does that make sense to you? Good. Because regret is a hard thing to live with. And because in strong emotion you could do damage to fragile relationships that's very hard to repair. So 3 things I want to say. The first is it's not the goal of your existence. No emotion is. Beware emotional volcanoes. And the third thing is an idea we call the golden mean. it comes from a great philosopher, Aristotle, lived a long, long time ago, and one of those people that everyone says he was the giants of our thinking and we all stand on his shoulders. Sometimes I think no one's standing on his shoulders anymore, they're puddling around at his feet. But anyway, he had this idea that he called the golden mean. And he doesn't mean nasty when he says mean, he's using it in the mathematical sense. Mean as in the middle. And this was his idea. The golden mean is the idea that any virtue is the mean between two extremes. If you put things on a continuum, you have one extreme at one end, another extreme at the other end, and in the middle is real virtue, is the sweet spot, is the golden spot. So, for example, courage is a virtue. If you have a person who is rash, every time they see a challenge, they just leap up and do it, they don't pause and think, they're out there, they're running, their engine is always on go, they're rash. They rush in where angels fear to tread. At the other end of that extreme, you have a person whose sense of doom is so great that they never actually take a step. They're always assessing the possible dangers around them. There's cowardice at that end. And in the middle is the golden mean, is the sweet spot. In the middle is courage. Do you see what he meant? So the same idea applies to something like self-worth. Self-worth. At one extreme, you can have people who are just so vain. They're just so fantastic. They're right. They should probably be obeyed. They know better. You should all really be listening to them because they're terrific. They just know everything. And at the other end of the extreme, you have people who are filled with self-doubt and self-loathing, and they don't trust anything they think because they thought of it. And in the middle between those two extremes, you have self-worth. Self-worth recognises that we are sinners whose evil contributed to the sufferings of Christ on the cross, but we are also the redeemed sons and daughters of God. Both of those things in balance equals self-worth. Aristotle didn't think of this stuff. It's all there in the Bible, but he put it in a beautiful phrase. You can see the same idea. It holds true for freedom and lawlessness and slavery. Decency sits between vulgarity and prudery. In the middle is decency. You can see what he means. And again, there's a lovely fit with the extraordinary passage in Ecclesiastes about there being a time for every purpose under heaven. And the same thought, I think, is true for emotions. The same idea that there's a sweet spot in the middle between two extremes is true of emotions. Have a look at anger. When I was a kid, anger was a sin. Anger was not allowed. Anger was not Christian. It was a bad thing to be angry. Do you remember hearing that when you were younger? Am I the only person? It was a really bad thing. But actually, if you think about it, a person who has a touch paper temper, who flares at everything, whose anger is volcanic, who's always shooting off their mouth, who's always getting mad about stuff, that's a terrible thing. But it would be equally dreadful to have a person who never has any anger, a person who lives in complete angerlessness, and they can look at this world we live in and some of the stuff that happens in it, some of the absolute moral evil that goes on in this world, and they're quite calm about it and they never get angry. Do you see what I mean? That's not wise either, and it's not godly. Jesus plaited a rope and went into the temple and was loudly angry. And he said, "Zeal for my Father's house has eaten me up." He was angry in the middle, at the right time, in the right place. I think Aristotle's idea of a sweet spot in the middle applies to anger. My son, I told you, he came with Ginger. When he was in grade 1, he was just little. And he went to school on the bus after a few weeks, and he pretty quickly worked out that the big cool kids sat in the back of the bus and he was cool, so he was sitting in the back of the bus. One day the bus driver got off the bus with John and was very distressed and said, "One of the big kids picked your son up by the neck and shook him." And I drove to that person's house and I knocked on their door, and this kid came out to the door and I said, "My son is sitting in the car with red marks around his neck. I do not know yet what I'm going to do about that, but I'll let you know. I'll let your parents know. I'll let the bus company know." And as I walked away from him, I felt like I was 27 feet tall. I was enlarged in my anger. And it occurred to me that that's what anger is for. You see, I hate confrontation. I wouldn't do it. But on behalf of my son, I would get angry. It wasn't a selfish anger. It had its place, and it was the right thing to do. Do you see what I'm saying? There's extremes, and in the middle is an emotion that has its time and its place. The same is true of fear, for example, of sadness. Sometimes in the body of Christian teaching that's been around for a long time, we have labelled certain of these emotions as not really good things for a Christian. And I don't agree with that. I think there is a time and a purpose for every emotion under heaven, and the sweet spot is often in the middle between two extremes. Maturity could be defined as an increasing ability to control your emotions. They don't control you, but you control them. And your emotional outburst, the times when you take your anger out for a walk, is selfless. You're not doing it just because you're mad. You're not just venting at people. It's not about your needs being met. It's about being angry on behalf of God's work in the world or on behalf of your child for an unselfish reason. The last of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control, and it's a good one. It is natural and possible and desirable, mothers, for your 2-year-old to learn self-control. It will happen. Be brave. Don't give up. It is possible. All people grow up and mature in this way. It is desirable for them to do that, and it can be part of how you think and pray for your kids. Emotions are part of being a person. All people have them, but no emotion is the goal of your existence. They can be like a volcano and sweep over you, but beware of that, of making decisions in that moment. And as you look at emotions and consider what's right, consider Aristotle's thought about the golden mean, being the mean between two extremes. We started this message looking at frog and toad, and I know many people in this room have prayed for my own frog and toad. Christy, her nickname has been Frog since she was a baby. She used to lie down with her hands like this and her feet up. She just looked like a little frog. We always called her Frog. John's nickname is Toad Boy, and he earned that. You can talk about that for a long time. He's a toad. We like him, but he's a toad. But these are my personal frog and toad. And my job as their parent has been about growing them up, growing them to maturity. And the two basic strategies are prayer and role modelling. I pray with all my heart for my kids.